My father died 18 years ago, so why is his tattoo standing in my store?
The Mojave Desert at 2 in the morning belongs to no one. It belongs to the wind that scrapes dead brush across cracked asphalt. It belongs to the coyotes crying somewhere beyond the ridge. It belongs to the particular quality of darkness that exists only in places where human beings were never meant to stay long. Sadie Locke had been staying here for 6 months. The Red Rock 40 sat on a forgotten stretch of Interstate 40 9 miles east of the California-Nevada border. Wedged between a rusted billboard advertising a casino that had closed 11 years ago and a concrete drainage ditch that ran dry 10 months out of 12. The building was cinder block, painted the color of old bone, its roof patched 3 times with different materials, so it looked like something assembled from whatever was left over after a real building had been constructed somewhere else. The neon sign above the pumps buzzed with a sound like a dying insect, casting red light across the cracked asphalt in long, uneven pools. Inside, the fluorescent tubes overhead flickered every 40 seconds. Sadie had stopped noticing it after the first week. She was wiping down the laminate counter at 2:17 in the morning when she heard them coming. She heard them before she saw them, which was the point. The desert carried sound differently at night, flattened it, sent it traveling farther than it had any right to go. What started as a low vibration in the floor, something her boots registered before her ears did, built steadily into a guttural, synchronized roar that rattled the cans of soup on aisle 3 and sent a thin crack of vibration through the plexiglass partition above the register. 3 motorcycles, heavy ones. Sadie did not turn toward the window immediately. That was the first thing most people did, and most people had never spent 3 years learning slowly and without a teacher that the moment you look at what is coming is the moment you stop paying attention to everything else. Instead, she looked at the convex security mirror mounted in the corner above the door, the wide-angle one that showed the entire store in a fisheye distortion, and she watched the headlights sweep across the ceiling through the front glass before she let herself look directly at anything. 3 Harley Davidsons pulled into the lot with the unhurried certainty of men who owned whatever ground they happened to be standing on. They parked in a loose formation near the air pump engines, cutting off in sequence, and the silence that followed was so complete that Sadie could hear the refrigerator compressor cycling on in the back room. She set the rag down flat on the counter. There was a Mossberg 500 pump-action shotgun taped with 2 wraps of electrical tape to the underside of the register shelf, positioned so her right hand could reach it without bending more than 6 inches. Her mother had told her to always know where the door was. Her mother had never told her why. Sadie had figured out the rest on her own over 3 years of graveyard shifts in places exactly like this one. The door chimed. I was large enough that he had to angle his shoulders slightly to clear the frame, though not because the frame was narrow. He simply occupied more horizontal space than the average doorway was designed to accommodate. 6'4", maybe an inch more. 300 pounds arranged with the kind of density that comes not from softness, but from decades of physical work. The weight of a man built by years rather than by vanity. His face was weathered like old saddle leather left in the sun, too long cut through with deep lines and a pale scar that ran from just below his left ear down to his collarbone in a single deliberate stroke. His beard was thick, shot through with silver, trimmed close enough to show the jaw beneath it. His eyes were the particular blue of ice in deep shadow, flat and assessing and entirely without warmth, in the way that some men's eyes simply are, not from cruelty, but from a lifetime of needing to read rooms before rooms read them. He wore a leather cut over a dark denim jacket, the patches worn to softness at the edges from years of wearing. The bottom rocker read Nomads. Over his left breast, a patch identified him as Sergeant-at-Arms. He did not look at Sadie when he walked in. He moved down the aisle with the easy, unhurried stride of a man conducting a private assessment of a space, his boots heavy on the linoleum, and he pulled a black coffee from the carafe near the hot food station and took a pack of Marlboro Reds from the display rack with the automatic certainty of a man who always bought the same things. He approached the counter and set both items on the laminate without a word. Sadie reached for the items to ring them through. The man reached into the inside pocket of his denim jacket for his money, and when his arm extended across the counter, the sleeve of his jacket rode up above the wrist, and Sadie Locke's hand stopped moving. The world did not slow down the way people described in stories. It did the opposite. It snapped into a sudden violent clarity, the way a photograph develops edges first until every detail was sharper than anything had a right to be. The tattoo sat near the crook of his elbow, a large and intricate piece done in old school style with heavy black lines and careful shading that had blurred slightly over the years the way all old ink does. A skull weeping wrapped in rusted barbed wire, the wire pressed deep enough into the bone that the barbs drew thin black drops. In its teeth, held loosely like something precious, was a single black rose stem, broken petals intact. Beneath the image, in typewriter font, were the numbers 101789. Sadie had last seen that tattoo in 2007. She had been 6 years old. She had been sitting on the left knee of a man who smelled like motor oil and peppermint, a combination she had never encountered on any other human being in the 18 years since. And she had been tracing the outline of the skull with her right index finger while the man talked to someone she could not see. She had traced the barbed wire. She had traced the broken stem of the rose. She had traced each number with the careful attention of a child committing something to memory without knowing that was what she was doing. Her finger had left no mark. The image had left every mark. The man did not move. He did not ring through the coffee or the cigarettes. He stood with his hand extended and his arm unmoving and her eyes fixed on a piece of artwork she had not seen in 18 years. And the fluorescent light overhead chose that moment to flicker. And in the half second of near darkness, Sadie made a decision she had not consciously arrived at. My father had that exact tattoo. The words came out quiet, not a whisper exactly, but stripped of volume the way words get when the body is redirecting resources away from projection and towards something more fundamental. They hung in the stale air of the Red Rock 40 above the hum of the refrigerator compressor and the distant sound of wind against the cinder block walls. The man did not move for 4 full seconds. Sadie counted them. Then the low-grade impatience that had been sitting in the corners of his expression left his face entirely. What replaced it was something harder to name, an intensity that had no temperature. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been searching for long enough that finding it stops feeling real. His hand, the one holding the crumpled 20, came down slowly and rested flat on the counter. What is your last name? Not a question the way most people ask questions. A question the way a man asks something when the answer is going to change the shape of whatever comes next, regardless of what it is. Locke, Sadie said. Sadie Locke. The man closed his eyes. It was not a long moment, but it was a complete one. Something moved across his face that came and went too quickly for identification, but left evidence of itself in the way his jaw tightened and the way his chest rose once with a breath that was slightly too controlled to be casual. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at her the way you look at someone you have been told about for a very long time. Jesus Christ, he said quietly. Frank's girl. Sadie's hand moved 6 inches to the right and found the taped stock of the Mossberg without looking. How do you know my father's name? He caught the movement. He tracked it and made no move toward her and kept both hands visible on the counter, palms down, which told her something about the kind of man he was, even as it told her nothing about whether he was dangerous. My name is Rex Gallagher, he said. They call me Warhorse. And if I wanted to hurt you, you would already be on the floor. Take your hand off the shotgun and let me close the door. She did not take her hand off the shotgun. He walked to the front door anyway, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible, and he flipped the sign from open to closed and slid the steel deadbolt into place with a sound that was heavier than it should have been. He went to the window and knocked his knuckles twice against the glass in a specific pattern. And through the smeared surface, Sadie could see one of the other riders outside straighten and move toward the perimeter of the lot, dissolving into the shadows beyond the pump lights. The other went the opposite direction. Rex came back to the counter and stood on the customer side of it, both hands still visible. Your father was Frank Locke, he said, president of the Oakland Charter, the best rider I ever knew and the smartest man I ever rode with. And he has been dead for 18 years, which is what the world believes and what you believe and what your mother believed until the day she died. And all three of those things are wrong. Sadie felt the counter edge against the back of her thighs. She was not aware of having stepped backward. He did not die in a motorcycle accident, Rex said. I will tell you the rest of it. But first you need to understand what tonight is. Because I did not come in here because I recognized you. I came in here because I needed coffee, and this was the only station open for 40 miles. I found you by accident, Sadie, which means if I found you by accident, someone else can find you the same way. She said nothing. He said, how long have you been using the name Locke at this station? It is on my employee badge, she said. 6 months. Rex looked at her and something shifted in the economy of his expression. That is how long they have been getting warmer, he said. Sadie stood very still behind the counter. The fluorescent light flickered. The refrigerator compressor cycled off, and the silence rushed in to fill the space it left. Outside, the desert wind moved against the building with a sound like something breathing. She had a habit she had developed over 3 years of nights in empty stations, in cheap apartments, in rooms rented by the week from people who did not ask for identification. When things became too large to process immediately, she reduced them to their components and addressed the smallest one first. It was not a strategy she had been taught. It was something she had arrived at by necessity, the way you arrive at everything when there is no one to teach you. The smallest component was the flip phone. It was in the left front pocket of her work vest where it had been for 3 years. A Motorola Razr charcoal gray with a crack running across the lower right corner of the clamshell where it had been dropped sometime before her mother bought it. Her mother had pressed it into her hands the morning Sadie left for the last time with everything she owned in a duffel bag and a tank of gas in $140 in folded tens. Keep this, mother had said. Do not turn it on yet. You will know when. Her mother had died 11 months later. Sadie had carried the phone for 3 years without turning it on because she had not known when and because she had been afraid of what when might feel like when it arrived. She took the phone out of her pocket now while Rex watched her without speaking. She found the charging cable she kept in the drawer under the register, plugged it in, and set the phone on the counter between them. The screen lit up. The battery icon appeared empty with a thin red sliver at the bottom, and for a moment nothing happened, and then the startup sequence ran its course. One notification appeared, a text message received on March 14th, 2022, the day her mother had been moved from the regular ward to hospice, from a number she did not recognize with a Nevada area code. She opened it, 6 digits, and below them 4 words, when you are ready, FL. Sadie read it twice. She looked up at Rex. He was looking at the screen with an expression she could not fully read, something that lived between recognition and grief. And when he looked up and met her eyes, she saw that whatever composure he had been maintaining had developed a crack somewhere in the middle. He did not reach for the phone. He looked at it the way you look at something that belongs entirely to someone else. He sent that to your mother, Rex said, in 2022. He knew she was running out of time and he had been watching from a distance for a very long time. He had a single-use number maintained through a trusted member of the network, used only once, only when it was necessary. That was the only direct communication he allowed himself in 18 years. The 6 digits, Sadie said. Rex said, they are the 4th part of something your father built. I will explain all of it, but I want you to understand first that what you are holding in your hand right now is the piece he kept for you specifically. Not for the club, not for any of us, for you. He built the vault in 2005, Rex continued. 2 years before the end, before Sierra Pass. He planned everything 2 years in advance. He split the combination into components and distributed each piece to a person he trusted absolutely. No single person has the complete combination. Your father made sure of that because he knew what men under pressure will give up, and he did not want any one person to carry something that could be extracted from them alone. There are 3 of us who carry the tattoo, he said. Me and a man named Jasper Cobb, who is outside right now, and a third man who left the club 15 years ago. His name is Dr. Everett Boland. He was a member for 8 years before he went straight. He became a forensic pathologist in Reno. Your father trusted him more than almost anyone he had ever known. Those are the 3 keepers. And your mother, without knowing it, was carrying the 4th piece. Sadie looked at the 6 digits on the screen. She thought about her mother. She thought about the way her mother had moved through the world, always slightly sideways to it, always with one eye on the door, never fully unpacking in any apartment they lived in, because unpacking felt like a commitment, and commitments felt like targets. She thought about how her mother had died in a hospital bed in Henderson, Nevada, with nothing much in her name, and a flip phone in the drawer of the bedside table that she had never mentioned again after the morning she gave it to Sadie. She thought about what it meant to carry a piece of something without knowing what it was. She closed the phone. Tell me what happened on Sierra Pass, she said. Rex pulled a stool from behind the display case and sat on the customer side of the counter, which was an unusual thing for a man of his size to do in a gas station, and he looked at the middle distance for a moment the way people do when they are preparing to say something they have carried for a long time. In 2006, he said your father's charter got caught in the middle of something they had not chosen. A cartel faction operating out of Sonora needed a clean route for moving money through the Southwest, and they had been using certain chapters as unwitting intermediaries through a complicated arrangement with 3 independent brokers. When the arrangement collapsed, $2 million in cartel cash went missing in transit. The cartel decided the Angels were responsible. They were wrong, but being wrong did not make them less dangerous. They told the Oakland charter that the debt would be settled in blood if the money was not recovered. Your father had nothing to do with the missing cash. Neither did anyone else in the charter, but the cartel did not particularly care about accuracy. They cared about the $2 million, and they cared about making an example. Rex paused. He had 6 months, he said. 6 months before they came to collect one way or another. He could have run. He could have taken his family and disappeared and spent the rest of his life moving. He tried to think of what that life would look like, and he could not build a version of it that ended somewhere other than a shallow grave, because the men he was dealing with had long memories and longer reach, and they would simply have followed him until they found him. So he built something else instead. He spent 2 years and every dollar he had ever saved putting together a vault in Las Vegas. $2 million of his own money accumulated over 20 years through every legitimate business the charter ran. He put it all in, and then he designed the death. He took the cartel money, Rex said. He was never supposed to have it. One of the brokers had hidden it with the club as insurance without permission and without telling anyone. Your father found it in a storage unit registered to a shell company connected to the charter. He took it. He put it in a bag. He put the bag on his motorcycle. And on the night of September 3rd, 2007, he rode that motorcycle up Sierra Pass in the dark, and he opened the gas line, and he rode it off the eastern edge at a point where the cartel had 2 men positioned to watch. They watched a motorcycle and $2 million in cash burn at the bottom of a Nevada ravine. The debt was paid. The example was made, and Frank Locke was dead, except he had burned his own savings, not their money. Serial numbers that would not match anything in the cartel's records. They would eventually figure that out, Rex said, but it would take time. And by the time they did, your mother and you would be gone with no trail, and they would be chasing a ghost. He looked at her steadily. He did it so you could disappear, he said. He did it so your mother could take you somewhere quiet and stay there and never have to look over her shoulder again. Sadie had been standing very still. She was aware of the counter beneath her hands, the slight texture of the laminate, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the fluorescent light above her cast everything in a brightness that flattened shadows and made the world look like a stage set. She said, my mother spent 15 years looking over her shoulder. She died thinking she was still being hunted. If he did all of this so she would be safe, why was she never safe? Rex did not answer immediately. He looked at his hands on the counter, then he looked up. That is the part I cannot fully explain to you tonight, he said. What I know is not going to make it better, and I made your father a promise that I would tell you the full truth when I found you, and the full truth requires more time than we currently have. Because there are 4 vehicles on this highway that have been moving in a formation I do not like for the last 8 minutes. Sadie turned toward the window. Down the long black ribbon of Interstate 40, far enough out that they were still only light rather than shape, 4 sets of headlights moved in a formation that was too tight and too coordinated to be civilian traffic. They were not slowing for the exit ramp. They were drifting right toward the shoulder, toward the cracked asphalt of the Red Rock 40, and as they drew closer, the profile resolved from light into shape. Black SUVs, heavy duty, moving with the certainty of a convoy that knew exactly where it was going. Rex was already on his feet. He crossed to the window and knocked a specific pattern against the glass, and Jasper Cobb materialized from the shadows near the pump island and moved toward the far edge of the lot without looking back. The other rider took the opposite angle. Rex turned back to Sadie. How long, he said, have you been using the name Locke at this station? She had already answered this question once. The repetition told her something. 6 months, she said. He looked at her with the expression of a man confirming a calculation he had been hoping would come out differently. That is how long they have been closing in, he said. The SUVs turned off the highway. Their headlights went dark. All four of them, simultaneously as if controlled by a single switch, extinguished their lights on the dirt shoulder of the interstate and rolled forward on nothing but engine noise and inertia. It was not the carelessness of men who had forgotten their lights. It was the precision of men who did not want to be seen making their final approach. They fanned out as they entered the lot, taking angles that covered three sides of the building. Sadie's right hand found the Mossberg under the shelf. She thought about the phone in her pocket, the 6 digits, the 4 words, the initial at the end that she had been looking at and had not yet fully decided what to do with. Frank Locke. Her father had been dead for 18 years. That was what she had believed. That was what her mother had believed. That was what everyone believed. Rex Gallagher was standing in a cinder block gas station on the edge of the Mojave Desert at 2:30 in the morning with a dead man's tattoo on his arm and a story that explained everything about her life that had never made sense. And outside, 4 black SUVs were taking positions in the dark, like pieces on a board. She thought about a man who smelled like motor oil and peppermint. She thought about a small finger tracing the outline of a weeping skull in the year 2007, 2 years before his vault was finished, 1 year before the night on Sierra Pass, the year he had already decided what he was going to do and was spending whatever time he had left being present for a 6-year-old girl who would carry the memory of his smell and his tattoo and his voice into a future he was deliberately removing himself from. She pulled the Mossberg free from its tape and racked the slide. The sound was clean and mechanical and final in the quiet of the store. Rex looked at her. Something in his expression shifted to a recognition of something he had expected to find. Your father told me, he said, that when I found you, I would know you immediately. Not because of what you looked like, because of how you stood when things got difficult. Sadie did not look at him. She was watching the SUVs through the cracked plexiglass, counting doors, counting angles, running calculations that her brain had apparently been building toward for 24 years without her full awareness or permission. She said, how many men do you have outside? 2, Rex said. She said, that is not enough for tonight. Rex said, I know, but it will be before long. She said, how long? He checked his watch and made one call, 4 words into the phone, then put it away. 40 minutes, he said, maybe less. She thought about the gas line running along the east wall of the storeroom, the one the landlord had told her was scheduled for inspection and had never been inspected, the one that ran from the main supply behind the building through a conduit in the eastern wall. She thought about the SUVs parked on the eastern perimeter. She thought about her father's Zippo lighter, the one she had taken from the box of his things her mother had kept in the back of every closet in every apartment they had ever lived in. She had carried it in her right pocket for 3 years without fully understanding why. She also thought briefly about a man named Arthur, which was the name she had heard Rex say under his breath into the phone before the 4 words. She did not know who Arthur was yet. She filed the name in the same place she filed everything that might matter later. She thought about 40 minutes and about what a person could accomplish in 40 minutes if she already knew the building better than the people coming through its walls. Sadie Locke set the Mossberg on the counter, within reach of her right hand, reached into her left front pocket, and touched the phone for just a second. Then she straightened her spine and looked out through the cracked plexiglass at the 4 dark SUVs arranged in the Nevada night like a problem that someone had decided was hers to solve. She had 6 months in this building. She knew every pipe, every panel, every structural weakness, and every hidden angle. She knew where the gas ran and where the wiring ran and where the back of wall was thinnest. Her father had died so she could be free. She was done moving sideways. The first shot took out the neon sign above the pumps. The sound was not like the movies. It was a wet, tearing sound followed immediately by a shower of red and white glass that rained across the concrete apron. And then the darkness outside was total. And the only light came from inside the building through the shattered plexiglass front windows. Then everything happened at once. Rex dropped below this counter line in a single fluid movement, drawing a custom M1911 from the holster at his hip and checking the chamber with a practiced flick that took less than a second. Outside, Jasper Cobb returned fire from somewhere beyond the eastern pump island. The muzzle flash strobing in the dark, and the sound of it echoed off the concrete walls and came back changed, flattened, unrecognizable as the thing that had made it. Sadie was already moving. She moved low and fast along the inner wall behind the chip display and the rack of motor oil and the rotating sunglasses stand, and she reached the end of the counter and came up into a crouch with the Mossberg across her forearms. The front windows came apart in sequence from left to right, each pane disintegrating under sustained automatic fire that was clearly coordinated, clearly practiced. The chip bags on aisle 2 exploded in a storm of foil. The coffee carafes on the hot food station shattered. The cigarette display behind the register took 3 rounds in close succession and became a slow-motion blizzard of shredded tobacco and cellophane. Sadie pressed flat against the interior wall beneath the window line and tried to count muzzle flashes through the gaps in the destroyed windows. She counted at least 8 positions, possibly 10. Rex rose from behind the counter in a crouch, his forearm resting on the laminate for stability, and returned fire with the M1911 in measured pairs. Each time he squeezed the trigger, something outside either fell or retreated. A burst of fire chewed along the top of the counter above Rex, and he dropped back below it and looked across the store at her. He held up 2 fingers and pointed toward the back hallway. 2 men moving to the rear of the building. She was closer to the hallway than he was. She went. The hallway was narrow concrete block, smelling of bleach and the particular mustiness of a space that was never quite dry. It ran from the main floor to the single bathroom and the reinforced steel back door, which the owner had installed because a previous employee had been robbed at gunpoint through the original hollow core door 4 years ago. Sadie knew the dimensions of this hallway the way she knew the dimensions of every space she had occupied for the last 3 years. 8 feet long, 32 inches wide, concrete floor, a single bare bulb overhead that she had replaced herself 2 months ago. She positioned herself at the corner where the hallway met the main floor, the Mossberg held at the low ready, the way her father had showed her in a Nevada forest when she was 5 years old. He had placed her small hands on the grip and the fore end and said, "You feel the weight first before you feel anything else. Let the weight tell you where it wants to go." She had been too small for it, and they had both known it, and neither of them had said so because the lesson was not about the gun. It was about learning to be still when the world was loud. She had grown into it. The back door took its first hit from a battering ram at the frame rather than the lock. The hinges shuddered. Dust sifted down from the gap between the door frame and the ceiling. Second hit, the frame cracked along its left side. Sadie settled her breathing. Third hit. The door swung inward hard and fast, and 2 men came through the threshold in rapid succession, moving low and fast in tactical vests with submachine guns raised working the corners. Sadie pulled the trigger. The blast in the confined hallway was physical. A pressure wave that hit the chest and the eardrum simultaneously, and the spread of buckshot at that distance caught the first man in the center mass of his vest and lifted him backward off his feet with mechanical efficiency. He hit his partner on the way out. They both went down in the dirt of the alleyway, alive but rearranged, scrabbling for purchase on the ground. Sadie racked the slide. The spent hull spun away and clattered against the wall. She did not move through the door after them. She stayed in the hallway behind the angle of the frame and waited. "Rear door is down," she called toward the main floor. Rex appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked at the open door at the 2 figures in the alley dirt, and then he looked at her for a moment that contained something that was not surprise but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man having something confirmed that he had not been certain enough to call a belief. Then he said, "There are too many of them. We cannot hold this position long." "I know," she said. She was already thinking about the east wall. The gas line had been on her mind since the moment the SUVs took their positions. It was a structural fact of the building she had cataloged in her first 2 weeks at the Red Rock 40. The line ran from the main supply coupling behind the building through a steel conduit bolted to the inner surface of the eastern wall. It fed the heating unit in the storeroom, which had not worked since November. The conduit ran at roughly chest height along 6 feet of wall before it turned and went into the unit. 2 of the SUVs were parked on the eastern side of the building. She had the Zippo in her right pocket. She looked at Rex. "I need 3 minutes," she said. "Keep them focused on the front." He started to say something. She said 3 minutes. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he turned back toward the main floor and rose from behind the counter and began returning fire in a pattern that was methodical and loud and designed to draw attention, and Sadie went to the storeroom. She did not turn on the light. She found the conduit with her left hand in the dark, followed it to the manual shutoff valve. She turned the valve counterclockwise. She felt a slight resistance in the line as the pressure shifted, and then the faint smell of gas began to build in the enclosed space of the storeroom. She went to the back wall where a previous employee had cut a hole in the cinder block above the baseboard heater years ago, badly patched with hydraulic cement that had never fully cured. She had noticed this hole on her second day because she had been looking for weaknesses in every wall she lived inside, and this one was obvious once you knew to look. It was roughly 4 inches in diameter, and it looked out onto a strip of dirt between the east wall of the building and the wooden fence that ran along the property line. The two SUVs were just beyond that fence. She could hear their engines idling low and patient. She took the Zippo from her right pocket, ran her thumb across the wheel once to confirm the flint was catching. Then she opened the bathroom window at the end of the hall, the small frosted one that looked out onto a concrete utility pad, and she went through it feet first and landed on the concrete pad outside and pressed herself flat against the building's rear wall. She went along the rear wall to the eastern corner around it, pressed along the east face of the building and the strip of shadow between the wall and the fence. Through the gap in the fence boards, she could see two black SUVs' engines running, one man visible outside the nearer vehicle, positioned at the rear quarter panel with a rifle pointed toward the main parking area. He was not looking at the east wall. He was watching the front of the lot. Sadie knelt at the base of the east wall, found the poorly patched hole, pressed the spout of the Zippo against the cement patch, and clicked the lid open. She waited 2 seconds for the gas smell to reach the outside air. It did, faint but present. She struck the wheel. The flame caught. She held it to the gap for 2 seconds, and then she moved. She went back along the east wall, fast and low around the rear corner and flat against the back of the building, and she had counted to 4 when the east wall exhaled. It was not a massive explosion. It was a concussive pressure release, a deep percussive thump followed by a sustained rush of heat and light that spread upward along the east face and outward across the fence, in a bloom that caught the nearer SUV along its passenger side in a wash of heat, intense enough to blow out the windows and ignite the door panel. The man at the rear quarter panel dropped his rifle and ran. The second SUV reversed hard out of its position, overcorrected, and its rear quarter struck the corner of the wooden fence and stalled. From inside the building, Rex's voice unchanged in register from the voice he had used to order coffee. Perimeter has shifted. East and south are open. Sadie came back through the bathroom window. She retrieved the Mossberg from where she had left it against the hallway wall. She walked out into the main floor where Rex was crouched behind the counter, and she looked out through the destroyed front windows at the lot. 2 of the 4 SUVs were out of position. The remaining 2 had pulled back from their original angles, and the incoming fire had reduced in both volume and accuracy the sound of men reorganizing rather than pressing. Rex looked at her. Then he looked at the east wall where a thin haze of smoke was filtering through the gaps in the cinder block. He said nothing. She said nothing. Outside, a voice cut through the lull. It came through a megaphone, clear and unhurried, with the quality of a man accustomed to speaking into silence and having the silence respond. The voice said, "I think we can agree that the opening exchange has established the situation clearly enough. My name is Harlan Voss. I represent certain interests that have been waiting a very long time for this conversation. I have no interest in the 2 bikers on the property. I have no interest in property damage or collateral complications. I am interested in one specific item, and once that item is in my possession, everyone here goes home. I would like to discuss the cipher." Sadie felt the word land. She looked at Rex. "The cipher," she said quietly. Voss continued. 18 years ago, a man named Frank Locke staged his own death on Sierra Pass. The cartel he was in debt to accepted the staging because the physical evidence was convincing. Burned motorcycle, burned remains, burned cash. Except the cash was not theirs. They confirmed this 14 months later, when a forensic accountant working for the Sonora faction ran the partial serial numbers recovered from the ash. The numbers did not match their records. The money that burned was not the money that was owed, which means the money that was owed still exists somewhere, and attached to it a location, a cipher, an access mechanism that Frank Locke distributed among 3 men, and it appears one other party whose identity we have been slower to confirm. Sadie did not move. We have known about the three men for some time, Voss said. We located Dr. Everett Boland in Reno approximately 4 months ago. We have been in conversation with Dr. Boland for the last 72 hours. He has been cooperative to the degree that he is able. But Dr. Boland holds only 1/3 of the combination, as does each of the two men with you tonight. The fourth component was the piece we could not identify until 6 months ago when a name appeared on an employee record at a gas station on Interstate 40. Rex was looking through the destroyed windows at the megaphone. His jaw was set. Sadie thought about the name on her employee badge, the name she had used because it was the only thing left of him. Voss said the girl has the fourth component. She may not know what it is yet. What I am offering is a simple exchange. She provides the component and everyone in that building walks out. No further engagement. Dr. Boland is currently being held at a location 38 miles east of your position. He is alive and in reasonable health. He comes home tonight if this conversation goes well. The megaphone went quiet. Rex turned to Sadie. His expression had changed again. He already has a Boland's piece, she said. Rex nodded slowly. If Voss had held Boland for 72 hours and Boland carried 1/3 of the vault combination embedded in his tattoo, then Voss already held 1/3 of the code. Rex and Jasper held 2/3 between them, and the 6 digits on her mother's flip phone were the fourth component. Voss did not need all 4 pieces to know they existed. He needed all 4 pieces to open the vault. She said 3 things quickly and without announcing any of them as a sequence. She took the flip phone from her pocket and looked at the 6 digits on the screen again, committing them to the part of her memory that was not accessible to stress or fear, the same part where she kept the layout of every building she had ever worked in. She put the phone back in her pocket. She said to Rex, "You said the vault is in Las Vegas." He said, "A garage on the west side, belonged to the club since 1997. She said, "How far?" 3 hours by road, he said. "Less if we push." She said, "Voss has 1 piece. You and Jasper have 2. I have the 4th. The vault cannot be opened without all 4 of us present. Voss is not going to kill anyone tonight. He cannot afford to." Rex looked at her with something new in his expression. She said, "But if Boland is 72 hours in, and Voss has already taken what he needed from him, then Boland is no longer useful as leverage, which means that window is almost over, which means we have maybe 4 hours before Voss decides a calculation has changed." Rex said 4 hours, maybe less. Sadie said, "Then we need more people, and we need them in the next 20 minutes. Who did you call earlier?" Rex said a man named Arthur, former forensic accountant. He has been monitoring cartel-adjacent financial networks on his own time for 3 years. He rides with the Oakland Charter. I called him the moment the SUVs appeared on the highway. He knows what tonight means. She filed that away. Arthur, a name attached now to a role, which was all she needed for the moment. She said, "And the others." He said, "They are coming." He checked his watch. 30 minutes, he said. The gunfire outside had stopped entirely now. The lot was quiet except for the sound of the burning SUV on the eastern side, a low, steady crackling, and the distant idle of one remaining vehicle beyond the pump island. Harlan Voss had not spoken again. He was giving them time to consider, which was itself a kind of pressure, the kind that grew in silence. Sadie sat on the floor behind the counter with her back against the cabinet and the Mossberg across her knees. Rex sat on the other side of the same counter facing the opposite direction. If anyone came through either the front or the side approach, one of them would see it first. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Rex said, "He watched you, you know, from a distance, for a long time." Sadie said nothing. Rex said, "After 2007, he could not contact your mother directly. Any direct contact risked exposing her location, and the cartel had people watching for exactly that kind of thing. Any communication pattern that suggested a dead man had someone worth reaching. He went completely dark. No contact for years. But he built the network to watch over you from a distance. People who could verify you were safe without knowing the full reason why." Sadie thought about the 3 years since her mother died. She thought about the landlord who had not asked for identification, the station manager who had hired her on a recommendation she could not trace, the woman at the hospital who had made sure her mother's last weeks were comfortable and had never sent a bill. She thought about what it meant to be watched over by someone you could not see. Rex said Dr. Bolin was part of that network. He was closest to you geographically, and his profession gave him reasons to interact with county systems without raising questions. He sent reports, not frequently, just enough to confirm you were safe. She said Voss found me through Bolin. Rex said Voss watched Bolin for months. He waited until Bolin made a move that confirmed your location, and then he took him before Bolin could warn anyone. The name lock on your badge was the confirmation Voss needed. He had been looking for the fourth holder for 18 years. Sadie thought about the badge. She thought about the morning she had filled out the paperwork for the Red Rock 40 sitting in the owner's office in Henderson, and the pen in her hand above the name field, and the moment she had written Locke instead of her mother's name. It had not felt like a choice. It had felt like the only true thing available. She said, why did he build it this way? Why not just leave the money to my mother directly? Rex said, because leaving money to a dead man's family is a trail, a vault with a cipher that requires 4 specific people to open people with no documented connection to each other or to the vault's contents, that is not a trail. That is a wall. He built it so that no one could take it from you without taking all 4 of you simultaneously. And the 4 of you being in the same place at the same time would itself be an event significant enough to attract attention. The protection was built into the mechanism. She thought about her grandfather building something 2 years in advance of his own death, distributing the pieces among people he trusted, encoding the last piece in a phone he had sent to a dying woman who had never turned it on. She thought about the fact that the system had worked for 18 years. She thought about the fact that it was failing now, not because of a flaw in the design, but because she had written her own name on an employee badge without knowing what her name meant. Rex checked his watch. 20 minutes, he said. Outside in the distance, the desert began to vibrate. It started beneath the feet. What started as a low vibration in the floor built steadily into a synchronized roar that rattled the remaining glass in the window frames and rose above the crackling of the burning SUV and above the desert wind. This was not 3 engines. This was not 10. Sadie walked to the destroyed front windows and looked out. Down the dark ribbon of Interstate 40 cresting the ridge, in a staggered formation that commanded the entire width of the road, was a wall of chrome and headlight. It resolved from light into shape as it descended toward the valley floor, dozens of Harley Davidsons in tight formation, the sound of them arriving before they did the sound of them changing the temperature of the air. More than 80 motorcycles came down off that ridge. Harlan Voss, standing somewhere in the darkness beyond the pump island, with his megaphone and his suit, had gone very quiet. Behind Sadie, Rex said, that is Earl Hendricks at the front. He has been riding since your father was alive. He knows what tonight is. Sadie watched the motorcycles fill the lot. She watched them encircle the remaining SUVs with the patient efficiency of men who had rehearsed nothing but understood everything. She watched Harlan Voss emerge from the shadows near the south fence line with his hands rising slowly, the megaphone hanging from one finger. When Earl Hendricks dismounted and walked toward the building, Sadie Locke was already moving toward the door. Earl Hendricks was not a large man. I was perhaps 5'10", lean in the way of men who had been lean their whole lives, with a face that was more lines than surface, and gray hair cut close to the skull, and eyes that were the particular dark brown of old walnut, warm and absolute at the same time. He walked past the destroyed displays and the cigarette blizzard on the floor, and he stopped in front of Sadie, and he looked at her with the careful attention of a man who had been carrying a description of someone for a very long time and was now adjusting it to match the reality. He said Frank would have been proud of how you handled tonight. Sadie said we have maybe 4 hours before Voss decides Boland is no longer useful. I know the warehouse is east. I know the approximate distance. I need 2 riders, and I need to leave in the next 10 minutes. Earl looked at her, then he looked at Rex. Something passed between them that lived in the space between long familiarity and mutual assessment. Earl said, you know where to start. She said Voss said Eastern Warehouse. When he was on the phone during the firefight, he said it once and did not say it to me. He did not think I was close enough or composed enough to retain it. He was wrong about both. Earl turned toward the men filling the lot and said one name, Jasper, and raised 2 fingers. Jasper Cobb materialized from the crowd without apparent effort, a compact man of 48 with a sniper's stillness and a face that disclosed nothing. Earl said, "You ride with her." "Rex rides with her." Jasper nodded once. Sadie was already moving toward the door. Rex fell in beside her. She took the Mossberg. She kept the flip phone in her left pocket. She left everything else. She stopped in front of Harlan Voss, who was standing near the south fence with two men on either side of him, and his suit still immaculate. Voss said, "The girl is making a mistake." She said, "How many men are at the warehouse?" He looked at her for a moment with something that was not admiration exactly, but was its practical cousin. He was a man who respected efficiency. He said, "4. Contractors. They have instructions to hold until I contact them personally." She said, "What is the exact address?" He gave it to her. She waited to see if he would ask for something in return. He did not. He said Dr. Boland was cooperative and conducted himself with dignity. "My interest has always been the vault." The rest of this was a contingency that got out of hand. She said, "If Boland is hurt, the cipher dies with him." She turned toward the motorcycles. A dark blue Road King had been pulled forward from the group. Sadie looked at it for half a second. Her father had placed her small hands on a motorcycle grip when she was 5 years old, had adjusted her fingers one by one and said, "You feel the weight before you feel anything else." That was all. One sentence. But her hands remembered what her mind had filed away. She swung her leg over the Road King and felt the weight of the machine settle under her. Her hands found the grips. Her feet found the pegs. She kicked the engine to life. The three of them rode out of the Red Rock 40 with the burning SUV still glowing orange on the eastern side in the desert opening up ahead of them in the flat total darkness that exists in places where there are no cities and no pretense of permanence. The road unreeled beneath them, and the air at highway speed was dry and still cold from the desert night. She thought about 38 miles and 4 hours and a man named Everett Boland who had attended her mother's funeral and sat at her bedside and made sure the bills were handled and never told her who was paying. The warehouse appeared on the south side of the highway at the 37-mile mark, a low flat roof structure behind a chain link fence with no signage and lights on inside that made the high narrow windows glow amber. Nothing else out here. No neighbors, no traffic, no ambient light, except the stars. Sadie pulled off the highway and cut the engine 200 yards short of the fence line. Rex and Jasper stopped beside her. She looked at the building for a while. She counted the windows. She noted the position of the vehicles. She located a loading dock on the north side. She looked for movement and did not see any. She said to Rex, "Loading dock north face." He said, "Standard commercial roll-up. Probably not locked from the outside." She said Voss told him to hold until he contacted them personally, which means they are waiting for a call that is not coming, which means they are waiting in a building in the middle of the desert at 3 in the morning, and the longer they wait, the less certain they are going to become. Jasper said, "Uncertain men make noise." She said, "Yes." She said, "I go to the loading dock. You two take the front. Do not breach the front until I am in position." Rex said, "You are going in alone." She said, "I am going in first." There is a difference. He did not argue. She went around the eastern edge of the fence line in a wide arc that kept her below the window, sight lines moving through the scrub brush and loose desert soil with the Mossberg carried low. The desert was quiet enough that she could hear her own footsteps. She found the loading dock on the north face. The roll-up door was down, but not padlocked. She found the standard side entry door beside it, metal with a push bar on the inside. From the front of the building, she heard Rex's voice loud and unhurried, saying that he had a message from Harlan Voss, and that whoever was inside should open the front door. The sound of boots on concrete moving toward the front of the building. Sadie pushed the side door open and went in. The warehouse interior was a single open space with a concrete floor and exposed steel rafters and 4 industrial work lights hanging from cables. There were folding tables along the east wall with equipment cases. 2 additional SUVs were parked inside, which meant 4 vehicles total on the property, not 2. Dr. Everett Boland was in the northwest corner. He was seated on a metal folding chair, his wrists zip-tied to its frame, his ankles secured to its legs. He was 67 years old, a compact man with white hair and a beard that had grown untended for 3 days, wearing a blue dress shirt and dark trousers, now badly wrinkled and marked with the indignities of 72 hours in a chair. His head was up, his eyes were open, He was watching the contractors move toward the front of the building with the careful attention of a man who had been studying his captors for 3 days and had arrived at precise conclusions about each of them. When Sadie came through the side door, his eyes found her immediately. He looked at her face for a full second with an expression that contained recognition and grief and relief, all of it compressed into a single long look. He said quietly, "You found your way here." She was already cutting the zip ties with the box cutter from the Red Rock 40. From the front of the building came the sound of the large roll-up door being raised, and then the sound of all four contractors registering the motorcycles that had followed and were now arranged in a semicircle in the warehouse parking area. Boland's wrists came free. He pulled his arms forward slowly, the careful, deliberate movement of joints that needed to remember what they were for. She cut the ankle ties and he stood using the back of the chair, and after a moment he was upright. He straightened his shirt with a precise, automatic gesture and looked at her again. He said, "Are you hurt?" She said, "No." He said, "Rex." She said, "He is fine." He nodded. Then he said, "I am sorry. About all of it. About the way it had to be done and about the things that went wrong and about the things I could not tell you." She said, "How long were you watching over me?" He said, 3 years, since your mother passed. Before that, I watched over her. From the time she settled in Henderson until the end. He asked me to. He said she would not know, and he said that was the way it had to be. And he said it was the one thing he could not forgive himself for, that she would carry it not knowing. But he could not tell her. If she knew he was alive, she would have found a way to reach him, and that reach would have been the trail they needed. Sadie thought about her mother. She thought about the apartment in Henderson with the boxes never fully unpacked, and the habit of sitting with her back to the wall in restaurants, and the way she had checked the locks twice every night before bed, a ritual so embedded in the household routine that Sadie had absorbed it and carried it forward without questioning its origin. She said she deserved better. Bullen said yes, she did. He knew that. There was no version of what he built that gave her what she deserved, and he lived with that every day. She said, "Can you ride?" He said, "It has been 15 years. She said, "That is a yes." They came out through the side door into the cold desert air and walked around to the front where Jasper was overseeing the four contractors with the calm efficiency of a man doing something unremarkable. And Rex was standing near the lineup of motorcycles, and when he saw Boland come around the corner of the building, he walked over and looked at the older man for a moment. Boland said, "Rex." Rex said, "Doc." Nothing else needed to pass between them. They had been carrying the same weight from different angles for 18 years, and they both knew what the other's portion had cost. A motorcycle was produced from the group for Boland. He mounted it with the deliberateness of a man reacquainting himself with a language he had set aside but not forgotten. Sadie sat on the Road King. She looked at the stars above the Nevada desert. She thought about Las Vegas, 3 hours west, in a garage that had been waiting since 2005. She kicked the engine into life. They rode west. The convoy was 15 riders. Earl Hendricks had handed the situation at the Red Rock 40 to his people and ridden out to join them at the 20-mile mark. The main group had stayed behind to manage Voss and to wait for what Arthur was putting together. Arthur, whose full name was Arthur Cobb, and who had no relation to Jasper, had spent 3 years building a financial case that no one had asked him to build, and that everyone in the club had known existed without discussing it directly. He was a former forensic accountant who had ridden with the Oakland Charter for 12 years and whose skills existed in a register entirely different from what his appearance suggested. He had been monitoring cartel-adjacent financial networks as a private project since the year Sadie's mother died, pulling threads in his off hours, assembling records, and cross-referencing transactions, and building a documentation package that described 18 years of organized financial crime in language that federal prosecutors would recognize and could use. By the time the Red Rock 40 had gone quiet, he had already transmitted the package from a laptop mounted to his workbench in a garage in Fresno. Harlan Voss was going to spend a very long time in a room with federal prosecutors. Not because anyone had beaten him there, because someone had been patient enough and skilled enough to make the case irrefutable and had been waiting for the right moment to deliver it. Frank Locke would have appreciated that. Las Vegas appeared on the horizon as a glow, before it appeared as anything else, a false dawn on the western sky, pink and amber and white. They came down off the desert into the valley, and the streets of the western neighborhoods were quiet in the way of places that had been awake very recently and had only just decided to sleep. The garage was on a street called Meridian, a nondescript block of low commercial buildings with enough patina of age to have permanence. The structure itself was a double-bay automotive garage with a painted concrete facade and roll-up doors and a hand-lettered sign above the entrance that said Meridian Cycles in letters that had faded to near illegibility. The sign had not been updated since the late 90s. Rex unlocked the front entrance with a key that had been on his keyring since before Sadie existed. Inside it smelled like motor oil and metal and concrete that had absorbed decades of both. Workbenches along the walls. Tools organized with the precision of a man who believed that knowing where your tools were was a form of respect for the work. Two motorcycles in various states of restoration under canvas covers. And in the back left corner, beneath a section of floor that looked identical to every other section of floor but was not a vault. Rex found the release with his boot, a specific pressure point in a specific location, and a section of the concrete floor, the size of a trap door, released along its seam and lifted on hydraulic hinges. Beneath it, a steel door, approximately 18 inches square, set into a reinforced concrete housing with a combination mechanism that was a physical dial of the kind built before anyone thought about what happened when systems lost power. Frank Locke had thought about that. The four of them stood around the opening in the pale early light filtering through the garage's high windows. Bolin went first. He knelt beside the vault door and worked the dial with the careful movements of a man who had rehearsed this in his mind many times without being certain he would ever do it in reality. His section resolved in under a minute. Jasper went second. His section took less time. Rex went third. He worked the dial, and when he was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at Sadie. She took the flip phone from her left pocket. She opened it. The screen was still active, the 6 digits still visible in the center of the display, white numbers on a gray background, sent by a man who was 18 years dead, by design from a number that no longer existed to a phone that had not been turned on until tonight. She read the numbers once. She put the phone back in her pocket. She knelt beside the vault. The dial was cold under her fingers. She could feel the precise detent of each number as she worked through the sequence, the small mechanical confirmation of each position, and she moved slowly, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be present for each increment of it, wanted to feel every step of something her father had built, with the understanding that she would one day be the one to complete it. The final number settled into place. The vault door released with a sound that was smaller than she expected. A soft thunk pressure equalizing the sound of a seal that had been maintained for 20 years opening for the first time. Rex reached in and drew out a waterproof case. He set it on the floor and opened it. Inside, vacuum-sealed bundles of currency intact, the serial numbers visible through the packaging. $2 million in denominations that had been carefully assembled. Frank Locke had thought about every variable. On top of the currency centered precisely was a steel box, approximately the size of a hardback book. On its surface, in a careful hand that Sadie did not recognize but recognized 2 words. Sadie, ready. She picked it up. She worked the small latch and the lid opened on a hinge that moved smoothly. No corrosion, the inside sealed against time with the same attention to detail as everything else her father had constructed. Inside, 2 things. A photograph 4 inches by 6, slightly faded at the edges. Sadie, approximately 4 years old, sitting on the fuel tank of a motorcycle, leaning back against the chest of the man behind her. She was laughing at something outside the frame. The man was not looking at the camera. He was looking at her. His expression was not complicated. It was the expression of a man who has arrived at the precise center of what matters to him and knows it. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same hand as the box, I never stopped watching over you. The road always leads home. Dad. She held the photograph for a moment. She looked at the 4-year-old girl in it, the open laughing face, the complete absence of caution, the particular freedom of a child who does not yet know that the world contains things to be afraid of. She looked at the man looking at her. She set the photograph on the floor beside her and picked up the second item. A letter folded, once written on both sides of a single sheet of paper, in the same careful hand, dense with words that had clearly been chosen with the precision of a man who knew he would not have the chance to revise them. She read it. She read it slowly in the motor oil and metal silence of the Meridian garage at 5 in the morning with Rex and Jasper and Bolin standing behind her at a respectful distance that none of them had needed to discuss. Frank Locke had written the letter on the night of September 2nd, 2007, the night before he drove the motorcycle up Sierra Pass. He had written it knowing it might be 20 years before anyone read it, or knowing it might never be read, or knowing both of those things simultaneously, the way you can hold two incompatible truths when the situation requires it. He had written about her mother. He had written about what it cost him to leave her in the dark and why the alternatives were worse, and how he had tried every calculation and arrived at the same answer each time. He had written about regret with the directness of a man who had decided that softening it would be a form of dishonesty and that she deserved honesty more than comfort. He had written about Bolin and Rex and Jasper and what they had agreed to carry and why he had asked them to carry it and what he understood that asking to mean. And then near the bottom of the second side, in letters that were slightly larger than the rest, as if the hand had pressed harder without intending to, you are going to find this because you are the kind of person who finds things. Not because I made it easy, because you do not stop. I know that about you already, and you are 4 years old as I write this. Some things you can see in a person from the beginning. I could see it in you from the first day. Whatever they told you about who I was, the truth is simpler. You were the best thing I ever did. Everything else was just the road that got me to you. Come home, Sadie girl. You have been away long enough. She folded the letter. She held it against her chest with both hands. For a moment, her eyes closed, the cold air of the garage against her face, the smell of motor oil and metal all around her, a smell she had carried in some register of cellular memory for 20 years, without knowing what it belonged to. Now she knew. Rex did not speak. Neither did Jasper or Boland. They stood in the practiced quiet of men who understood that some moments did not want witnesses, only presence, and they offered presence without intrusion, which was its own form of respect. After a while, Sadie opened her eyes. Bolin said quietly, "Your mother knew at the end, not everything, but enough. She told me in the last weeks. She said she had always known the accident did not feel right. She said she had made peace with not knowing the rest. She said the only thing she regretted was that she had not been able to tell you that you were going to be all right." Sadie was quiet for a moment. She said she knew I would be all right. Bolin said, she said, and I am giving you her exact words because I have been holding them for 3 years. Waiting for this moment, she said, that girl is the strongest thing I ever made. She does not need me to tell her, but tell her anyway. Sadie looked at the concrete floor. She breathed in once slowly and out again. Then she stood up. Outside, the Las Vegas sky was turning from black to the deep saturated blue that preceded the actual dawn, the color of something about to be revealed. The stars were fading at the edges while the center still held them, and the air had the quality it only had in this precise window of time, cool and still, and carrying the smell of the desert from the west and the city from the east. She walked out of the garage and stood in the early morning air, with the photograph in one hand and the letter in the other. 2 federal vehicles had pulled quietly onto Meridian in the last few minutes. Dark sedans with the particular unremarkable quality of official transportation. Harlan Voss was being helped out of the rear of the second vehicle by 2 men who moved with the specific economy of people with a job to finish before the city woke up. His suit was still intact and his posture had not collapsed, but his hands were bound in front of him now, and as he was guided past the mouth of the garage entrance, he turned his head once in Sadie's direction. He looked at her across the distance of the parking apron. He did not say anything. His expression was not defeat exactly. It was the expression of a man acknowledging that a calculation had gone wrong and accepting the fact of it. He looked at her for 2 seconds and then he looked forward again, and the men beside him walked him toward the waiting vehicle, and the door closed and the vehicle pulled away from the curb. Sadie watched it go. Arthur Cobb's financial package had been enough. 18 years of documented transactions, 18 years of cartel, adjacent financial crime assembled by a man on his own time in a garage in Fresno, transmitted before the sun came up on a night that had started as a routine coffee and cigarette stop on Interstate 40. The kind of evidence that did not require a verdict to be devastating. The kind that made every future calculation point in one direction. Justice delivered not with fists, but with records, with patience, with the kind of work that does not announce itself but simply arrives complete and irrefutable at exactly the right moment. Frank would have appreciated that. Rex came out and stood a few feet away, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. After a while, he said Earl, he has confirmed Voss is in federal custody. His contractors from the warehouse are being processed separately. Arthur's package covers everything. It is done. She nodded. He said the vault contents belong to you. All of it. Your father's name is on the original documentation transferred to beneficiary designation in your name in a legal instrument dated 2005 that Arthur has already located. It was filed under a shell that has been dormant since 2007 and will take some time to unwind properly. But it is clean. It is yours. She nodded again. He said there is no obligation to any of it, to the club, to Las Vegas, to any of the people who rode out tonight. They rode out because of what your father was to them and because of what a promise means, not because they expect anything in return. She said, I know that. He said, what you do next is entirely your own decision. That was what he wanted. He said he could not give your mother the choice. He gave you the choice instead. She thought about 3 years of moving sideways. She thought about what it felt like to have moved forward instead, even once, even through a single night that had cost this much to complete. She thought about the difference between those two directions and how the difference was not as large as she had imagined it would be when she was living inside the sideways years. She put the letter in her pocket next to the flip phone. She put the photograph in the opposite pocket next to the Zippo. She felt the weight of both in their respective place at balance, like something that had been looking for its proper distribution and had finally found it. She walked to the Road King at the curb. She sat on it. She felt the weight of the machine settle under her with the particular solidity of something designed to go somewhere and waiting for a direction. Rex came to stand nearby. He looked at her with those eyes that she now understood correctly. Not coldness. The grief of a man who had been carrying a promise for 18 years without being certain he would ever be able to keep it. He had kept it. She could see that the keeping of it had changed something in him, released something that had been held against its nature for a very long time. She said, you kept your word to him. He said he was worth keeping it for. She said yes. She sat with that for a moment. The sky was lighter now, the blue deepening toward the shade that immediately preceded the sun's actual appearance at the horizon. Somewhere in the city, a car moved along a distant street. Somewhere in the desert, a bird made a sound she did not know the name of. She kicked the engines to life. The sound of it in the early morning quiet of the Meridian Street was a low, settled rumble, patient, idling, the sound of something with power held in reserve. She did not ride away immediately. She sat with the engine running and looked at the street ahead of her and thought about where it went. She thought about the road her father had paved with 18 years of silence and sacrifice and careful distributed trust, a road that had been waiting for her without her knowing it, that had led her here, whether she had been trying to find it or not. She thought about what came next, not in the way she had thought about it for 3 years, which was the thinking of a person moving away from something, every next thing defined by its distance from the last. But in the different way, the forward way, where next meant something you were choosing rather than something that was happening to you. She had a letter in her pocket that told her she was the kind of person who found things. She thought that was probably enough to start with. She did not ride away from something. For the first time in 3 years, Sadie Locke rode toward it.